Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be hanging out with you.
I'm excited to be here. Look at this. I mean, how many times in your life as a woman in tech do you get to sit in a room and you look to your left and you look to your right and you look 2 seats over and you look 3 seats over and you see women who are dope? I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Woo!
Thank you for having me.
So, Erin, before we jump in, what did you think of the letter?
Wow. Look, I adore former President Barack Obama. I adore former First Lady Michelle Obama. So to just sort of for them to acknowledge that we're here, take the time to write a letter, and acknowledge the importance of this work in this space at this time, given our current environment, that's huge. It's profound. The letter says it all. I don't know that you can really add to what the president has said. He has spoken and he has dropped the mic.
Well, I'm excited to talk about you and your career. And I mean, I don't know that everyone knows your story, so I'm really excited to dig into that because as a Black woman technical executive at a very innovative tech company, you know, I think talking through your journey, how you've gotten here, what your point of view is going to be incredibly inspiring to this audience. I'm just going to do the poll again because I don't think Erin was here before. Raise your hand if you're an engineer.
Ooh,
Raise
ooh.
your hand if you're in product.
Ooh, ooh.
Raise your hand if you're in design.
Ooh,
Raise your hand if you're just awesome and doing other things. Very good. No one's hand should have stayed down on that one. But just to give Erin a sense of like who's in the room. Raise your hand if you're leading teams. Yeah. So I think
What a room.
You've traveled and traversed against all these spaces, right? So take us to the beginning. Take us to Detroit.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Detroit. Anyone ever been to Detroit, Michigan? It's in the Eastern time zone.
Tiffany.
We got a few. Born and raised in Detroit. And, you know, it's like a lot of good things about Detroit that people don't know. I think the powerful thing about being a woman that grew up in Detroit is the exposure to engineering as a discipline. So it's a manufacturing-based economy, right? So the big 3 automotive companies that are based in the U.S. are based in Detroit. And so as a result of that, most people that I knew, most of the adults that I knew growing up were employees at Ford, General Motors, or Chrysler. And so I got early exposure to engineering as a discipline and as a viable path. So when you grow up in Detroit, it's like be a doctor, be a lawyer, or be an engineer if you're smart. And so for me, the notion of engineering was something that, you know, as a little Black girl in Detroit, I at a minimum had exposure to, which was huge. But I didn't know what that meant. Right. And so I think that's sort of a difference. I also, you know, went to public schools, K-12. And so, you know, one of the challenging things about Detroit as opposed to living bi-coastal is just there's some exposure gaps and some access gaps. So as a senior in high school, I applied to one college. And it was the one college that everyone who I knew who was smart went to. And that was the University of Michigan. So it was just 40 minutes away from literally where I grew up. And thank God I got in because I definitely would not, who knows? But I would not recommend that, right? Like that's just like an exposure gap, right? I just didn't know any better. So I applied to one college. I got in and I knew I applied to the College of Engineering. And so I had an aptitude for math and science and always just kind of had this natural interest in math and science. A lot of smart adults I knew were engineers. And so I didn't actually land on software, computer science, computer engineering until I got to college. And that process was interesting because as a member of the College of Engineering your freshman year, there's a requirement to take a computer programming language course. And so I was behind in that. I didn't even know what a computer programming language was, right? So here I am competing with people who have been programming since they were like kids.
Right.
And I'm starting freshman year just like C++, means nothing to me. And so that was the first programming language I learned. So there were some significant hurdles just to kind of catch up, and then even bigger hurdles to be able to compete.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Coming up this afternoon, we are having a recent grads panel about how early does the pipeline leak. And we have some amazing young women who are early in their career who will be taking the stage with Patricia, our COO. And I'm curious, because I know some of the panelists can relate to that experience. What was that like when you entered into the classes and some folks have maybe been coaching since they were 15, 16. How did you navigate that? What was that?
Yeah, where does the pipeline leak? I think a lot of it is societal. Most engineers that I work with that I know who are men always talk about the story of tinkering when they were kids and playing video games when they were kids and leveraging that experience as a way to begin kind of critical thinking, to begin figuring out software, to begin understanding programming. That certainly wasn't my story, right? I didn't get this exposure until freshman year in college, which put me at a deficit. And so, I think the pipeline sort of leaks early because of these societal pressures, right? We're encouraged to play. I mean, you guys have heard this. We're encouraged to play with dolls. They're encouraged to play with Legos, right? And you begin kind of thinking about yourself as a creator at a very early age. Like, I can build something that other people can use at a very early age. If you're predisposed to these kinds of toys or these kinds of interactions. And for me, that was something that I had to learn and eventually figure out. But the challenge is once you start and it's your freshman year, right? So I'm going to give you some exposure to my world. I went to a high school that was 99.999% Black. I am Black. I went to this high school, it was all Black. Freshman year in college, 1,200 students in my department, electrical engineering and computer science, and I was the only Black woman.
Wow.
Right? So that's crazy culture shock.
Yeah.
On top of that, it's like, wait, everyone else knows the syntax already? Everyone else knows how to program? You've already been exposed to do loops and do while loops and a for loop, and you already get the basic concepts. So that experience of feeling like an imposter is something that's very real. The interesting thing, though, is that experience alone prepared me for every environment I've been in for the rest of my life. So I work at YouTube. I'm a Black woman in product at YouTube. I'm the only one.
She's the head of YouTube's VR product.
To be PR. But that experience at the age of 17, 18, that literally exposed me to what the rest of my career trajectory would look like. And it's a tough experience, something to have to learn at the age of 16, but that feeling of being an imposter, even whatever the credentials say on paper, that experience never really goes away. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is the power of a room like this, because you can look around and you can see other people who look like you, and you're like, actually, I kind of belong here, right?
You do. It's facts. So to transition, so you talked about your school experience. I would love to hear more about kind of your career experience and also the opportunity for women in product.
Yeah. So I started off as a software engineer, designing algorithms embedded in electronic trading applications at Morgan Stanley. And that was a unique path as a software engineer, right? Like most of my classmates went to Microsoft, actually. Some went to this company called Google, which probably would have been a good financial move. I went to Wall Street. And the reason I went to Wall Street was because I liked the pace, I liked the energy, and there were people who looked like me at the top of Wall Street that I had exposure to. And so I felt like, wow, this is a path for success, whereas I didn't see that model in tech at the time. And that informed my 22-year-old mind, and that is what informed the decision. So I went to work on Wall Street. The cool thing about that is I got exposure to business. And that experience is what prompted me to go to business school. So I got a master's in business. And, it was a very similar experience in that all the smart people that I knew at the time, or the people that I really respected, the people who were at the top of Wall Street, who were Black, they all went to Harvard. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. I didn't make the same decision or the same bad decision that I made in undergrad. So I applied to 3 schools for grad school instead of just the one. So I went to Harvard for my MBA, and that gave me the understanding of what business is. It gave me a breadth of education, whereas, studying computer science, particularly at a large institution like Michigan, it's very depth oriented, right? You become like this amazing software engineer, but I didn't know a lot about the rest of what it took for a business to run.
The context that comes around the technology.
Exactly. And so that's what business school gave me. It gave me breadth education. It gave me a network. And it also gave me credibility. I walk into a room as a Black woman. It's a couple strikes against me just because it's like, wait, this kind of doesn't make sense. People don't see models like me. And so, going to these great schools gives me credibility that is very helpful. But the cool thing about product is it's the mix of both worlds. It is the mix of technical aptitude and business acumen. And many people who are leading in Silicon Valley today, if you look at the leaders across some of these great companies, a lot of them have product backgrounds, particularly at a place like Google.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your vision for VR. Like, what made you decide this very emergent technology, right? What made you say, like, yeah, I want to tackle that, and I want to help an organization figure out how to translate something that is very emergent?
VR. So I was exposed to VR as a college student. There were a few institutions at the time that had these VR labs, or they were actually called caves at the time, because that was the only way to produce 3D renderings in real time. And you had to literally be in a physical cave. And so I took a programming language class, which was called VRML. So the old school folks in the room probably know what that is. So that was my exposure to VR at a very early stage. One of my mentors, and I know a couple of folks who were early investors in Oculus. And so that was sort of the initial way for VR to kind of cross the chasm and enter in the current stage of what VR is today. And so I got this exposure. At the time, I was leading fantasy sports at Yahoo. And
hey, a fan, Yahoo. I like it.
It's my man right there. So fantasy sports at Yahoo. And look, I gravitate towards fun products, right? Like fantasy sports. I'm a sports fan. You get to play games. VR is kind of gaming oriented.
How many of you did the demo? How many of you done the VR demo so far?
Check it out. It's game changing. I would implore you all to check it out. And so I got exposure to that relatively early. It was Oculus DK1, the first dev kit of Oculus. And I remember doing the demo, and it was mind-bending. And I was like, wow, it's finally here. The opportunity to be fully immersed in a computer-generated environment, that means something. The implications of that, the use cases of that mean something. But they specifically mean something for me as a woman of color, because there's literally no other technology in the world where you can have the experience of walking in someone else's shoes. So if you think about what that means in terms of human-to-human interactions and inspiring empathy and compassion, right? We don't really understand someone until we've had the experience of walking in their shoes, or understanding what it's like to be them. And even if that experience is relatively short, call it a couple minutes, that could be just like really impactful in terms of your understanding or your ability to relate to them as a human being. And I think that's powerful. And so, sort of making the career decision or as I got to this point where I was like, okay, what's next? Critical juncture, what's next? The opportunity to work in VR and AR, the opportunity to help be at the forefront of building technology that can literally change the human condition, I think is really powerful. And so it's an opportunity I couldn't let pass me by.
So before we open up for questions, I'd love to, because I imagine there's a lot of questions. Raise your hand if you've got questions for Erin. Yeah. It's pretty dope to have someone who's just an incredible role model and another unicorn. They exist. We're not really unicorns on stage. But can you talk a little bit about your philosophy and leadership and what your take is on D&I, which is obviously tech companies, as we talked about this morning, have been struggling with?
Yeah, incredibly important. Look, I work at a tech company that struggles with diversity numbers, and the data speaks for itself. I don't think there's any excuse, right? Like, let me look at this audience, right? There are amazing women, there are amazing people of color who are incredibly technical, who are brilliant, who are talented, and who deserve to have an opportunity to build the products that we use. You look at a company like YouTube, right? If you think about YouTube's user base, a significant portion of users are from underrepresented minority groups, are women, are people of color, and to have people who are representative, who are building these products, is immensely important. And that's a better outcome for everybody. It's a better outcome for the users who we are attempting to serve. It's a better outcome for our creator base, if you think about YouTube, and it's a better outcome for the overall business. Everyone knows diverse teams make better decisions, and I know diverse teams make better decisions. I think you could just read a little bit of the research that's been published. It has been published. It has been proven that diverse teams make better decisions and lead to better outcomes. And so I think the onus is on us as leaders in tech. The onus is on the leaders in my company and the leaders of all the tech companies to really figure out how to ensure that we become more diverse as an organization going forward.
That's powerful. I want to keep talking to Erin, but I think y'all have questions. So Molly, may we call on you again to help us with the mic? Thank you so much. I think there were some people who had hands up over here. Is that right? So if you hold your hands up, we got a question up front, up here with the awesome little braid knots on her head.
She has the mic.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Brianna Thomas, and my question is, have you observed any companies that are doing the D&I the right way, and what do you see as their recipe for success or their business model for that?
Yeah, there's a company we studied, oh my gosh, and I can't recall the name, but you and I have talked about it, that has figured this out. I may have to get back to you on the name, it just eludes me right now.
There's one I'm a fan of, which is in the room, Slack. They have just put out their diversity reports, you should definitely check it out, and they have, I think it's 7% Black women engineers. Most tech companies are 1 to 3% people of color total, non-technical and technical. So, wow. And they don't have a D&I leader. They're doing it through how they source for hiring. So that would be an example I would give. Let's try and get a couple more questions in. Please keep your hands up. Molly will come find you. Thank you, Molly. Someone had...
Over here?
Raquel, you want to ask a question? Oh. Over here, up front. There it is. We're getting there.
Hello, Erin. I'm a huge fan. My question is, what advice do you have for Black women who want to break into product management and who don't yet have an MBA but would like to pursue that path?
Sure. So I don't think an MBA is required to be a good business leader. I mean, there are many amazing business leaders who don't have MBAs.
They're not so great ones that have them. So
yeah. Exactly. I hope I'm not included in that bucket. But I do think having a business acumen is helpful. And so I think if you are interested in being a PM, if you have a technical background, or even if you don't, I think there's a couple buckets that really matter, right? Having a solid intuition around what a good product is. right? That matters. And I think, the way that you build that and develop that is just using it, right? Everyone talks about the 10,000 hour rule. I mean, I download every single app on every app store, I'm a user of products, and I've just always had that experience. I like new things. I like experiencing them. And I'm deeply reflective around how using a product makes me feel, right? And I'm super sensitive to how it impacts other people as well. Like, what are the core use cases that this product is attempting to solve? So I think that's one thing. I think, having the technical aptitude, being able to work well with engineers. If you're an engineer yourself, generally you're kind of have that natural skill set. But, I think that's, a second thing, being analytical, being able to kind of mine data to make really solid product decisions. Having a sensibility for design, right? I mean, if you think about the trifecta, it's design, product, and engineering. That's what it takes to build a product and get it out into the world. But as the PM, as a product person, there's some philosophies that says you are the mini CEO of the product. And so you think about it holistically. You work with, a team of engineers and designers to really get the product out into the world. But I think the PM is responsible for the W questions, right? What are we building? Why are we building it? For whom are we building it? And you very much rely on your engineering team and your team of designers to answer how.
So in our closing moments here, what perspective do you want to share, or a piece of insight do you want to leave the community with?
I think the biggest and most important thing, one, obviously, look, I'm biased. I'm a huge fan of product managers. I think we need more women PMs. It's a great training ground for leadership in the space. But I think the other thing is to not give up, right? Every single person in this room is needed in the space, and we need to support each other, and we need to root for each other because we're all on the same team. And I have this conversation with my colleagues all the time, like, we're my colleagues, but I call like just people in tech, women in tech, people of color who are in tech, friends. I'm on their team. Like, I'm rooting for every single person in this room, and I hope you guys are rooting for me as well, because together we'll win.
Thank you so much. I wish we had more time. Erin is just incredible to spend time with, and thank you for all your leadership and everything you're doing, and for being here with us today.
And props to Kat. I mean, look at this room. This doesn't happen without her leadership. So.
Thank you.